Hey, how are you? Thanks for coming to see my video. I want to tell you about the top 10% of books that I read in 2021. So 2021 was the first year that I read over 100 books. I picked my top 10, so literally the top 10% of the best books I read, all the books I read that year. And after I picked them, I realized they were actually all written by women, which was very exciting. And I was like, oh, that's a video. That's a video right there. I'm gonna do the YouTube thing with that. We'll start with some kind of like weird or spooky books. One of them's spooky, one of them's weird. Then we'll camp out in sad girl books for like a really, really long time. And at the very end, I'll give you a nonfiction recommendation that has stuck in my mind. If you want to skip to any particular book, or if you're not interested in one that I'm talking about, all the timestamps are in the description. So feel free to jump around in the video. And I really hope you enjoy. You've heard of this one. You've definitely heard of this one. It's really good. I think I read it, when did it come out? Did it come out in the fall of 2021? That's when I read it. And I had never read anything of Susanna Clarke's. I mean, the only other full book she has, I think, is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which I finished summer, I want to say. So I read this first, and I had no idea what I was going into. All I knew is there was an unreliable narrator and a labyrinth. So let me tell you about this book. Piranesi opens up with an unreliable narrator. Very clearly, you're in a first-person perspective, and the first 10 pages make no sense. But the writing is beautiful. The way I would describe the setting is like you're trapped in this like ethereal giant Versailles that has oceans inside its halls and albatrosses and crumbling statues. Like there was this like duality between, in the descriptions, between like light and decay. It's very beautiful. So it really reads like you're stumbling through what used to be a huge palace and now has been abandoned, but the narrator's alone. Or at least it seems like the narrator's alone. He always mentions one other person who he just calls the other. And they seem to have a very strained and strange relationship. The other just comes to visit our narrator, Piranesi, now and again, and treats him a bit like a child and doesn't quite answer his questions. And then things start to get interesting when Piranesi finds a few objects as he's exploring this giant building universe that he's in. It's a little unclear. He finds hints that someone else is there. There might be a third person, and Piranesi is clearly very lonely. So you sort of unravel the mystery of this place that feels like an abandoned building, but it's huge. It's big enough to be a universe. It's big enough that to cross from, gallery to gallery, it takes him several days. He basically camps out on different galleries, and just it's amazing the way it unfolds. Like you get little bits of the mystery at a time. The book is like an elegant little jigsaw puzzle. And the deeper you go, the more you're like, what is happening? But in the best of ways. I really recommend sticking with it. The writing's very beautiful. Yeah, pick this guy up. Give it a chance. It has a good reputation for a reason. The next book I wanted to tell you about was a book I reread in 2021. This is the spooky book I wanted to talk to you about. So this is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. And I love my edition because it has these like, how do I even film this? It has these like corrugated pages, I guess, and it has these gorgeous illustrations. Look at these angry townspeople. Look at these two Gothic sisters. This tells you everything you need to know about the book. Two Gothic sisters live in a castle, and the village hates them. Why? Well, Mary Cat, the younger sister, is our narrator, and she tells us the story of her life. She lives with her older sister, her cat, and her uncle. The rest of their family died under mysterious circumstances, and the villagers are angry. And that's really all you need to know. Okay, my camera cut out. It's been a little possessed. But I think I was just telling you about the cover, and I really wanted to read what's in the cover to you. There's these creepy mushrooms, and there's these really cool quotes. Are you ready? My name is Mary Catherine Blackwood. I am 18 years old, and I live with my sister Constance. I have often thought that with any luck at all, I could have been born a werewolf, because the two middle fingers on both my hands are the same length. But I've had to be content with what I had. I dislike washing myself, and dogs, and noise. I like my sister Constance, and Richard Plantagenet? I don't know how to say that word. And Amanita phalloides, the death cap mushroom. Everyone else in my family is dead. You will be wondering about that sugar bowl, I imagine. Is it still in use? You are wondering, has it been cleaned? You may very well ask, was it thoroughly washed? And there's this creepy gothic spider. It's excellent. I really recommend this. We're still in spooky season of 2022. If you're looking for a quick classic gothic read that's very accessible, I recommend this. I think I read this in like the 11th grade. When I was a reader, but I didn't really like classics, and yet I still devoured this. It's written quite modernly, I'd say, and really these illustrations tell you everything you need to know. Like, if this is the atmosphere you're looking for spooky season, you are gonna get it. Okay, so the next books I want to tell you about, I don't even know how to begin to describe them. So this one has some sci-fi elements, but is historical fiction and social commentary. And this book is by one of my recently discovered, but now probably one of my favorite writers, Octavia Butler. If you haven't read Kindred, it's an amazing entry point into Octavia Butler's work. It's a standalone novel, unlike a lot of her other books. So Kindred follows the story of Dana. I had to look on the back to make sure I'm saying the right name. It follows the story of Dana. So Dana is a modern Black woman married to a white man in the late 20th century USA. And they recently moved to a new home. And suddenly when she's in this new home, she has this weird sensation around her, and so her surroundings change. She goes back in time to antebellum America. And she goes back in time and rescues this little boy from drowning. But of course she's a Black woman in antebellum America, so immediately everyone kind of like freaks out and literally threatens to kill her, and then she's transported back into the present. She has no control over this time travel. A lot of time passes in the present. Sorry, a lot of time passes in the past and not a lot passes in the present. So she doesn't lose a lot of present time, but gains a lot of like past time, if that makes sense. And she's basically stuck traveling between these two time points. And I don't want to spoil anything further, but it's riveting. It's an amazing exploration of womanhood and race and how close that history of antebellum America still is to the modern world, and like how much it resonates. It's absolutely gorgeous. I really recommend it. And if you're not a big reader, yeah, you know, to the point that something like this, tiny font, looks a little daunting, then you're in luck, because Octavia Butler's books have now started to be adapted into graphic novels. So the cover of the graphic novel is, pardon the pun, quite graphic. So it makes it very clear what this book is about. The art is superb. I'm trying to find a nice part in the early beginning that shows you sort of a sense of what we're going for. Here's Dana in the present day, eating with chopsticks. And here she is, suddenly rescuing a little boy from a fire. That's her second trip into the past. and this is in the early pages. And if you can get your hands on this one, it's super faithful to the book. I think it like takes a lot of the dialogue and is a much faster way of discovering the story, or rediscovering the story if you read this book. This was so amazing, as was the original novel. I just really recommend picking this up. It's gorgeous. I have another book by a Black author, and this book, whew, this book, Transcendent Kingdom by Yagasi. You may have heard of her other book, Homegoing, which is also amazing. Absolutely gorgeous. And I like both of them, but this one in particular really spoke to me because of the subject matter. So this book follows a neuroscience PhD student, which is exactly what I was at the time when I read this book, who was working on behavioral neuroscience in mice, which is exactly what I was doing. And she is struggling with science versus faith and dealing with past grief and past trauma. Notably, she loses her brother. I can't remember if it's early on in the book or before the book even starts, but it's on the back of the blurb, so I don't feel like that's a spoiler. She loses her brother to a heroin overdose, and her mother struggles with depression and relies on our main character quite a lot. So she has to balance the demands of a PhD, her own sort of coming of age, coming into herself, romantic relationships, who does she want to be, struggling with her faith, and also struggling to support her family and, well, her mother, and grieve her brother. It's an amazing book. It's a feat. It's a very short book. The font's quite large. And I love it. It's a book about being human, about immigration. I think I forgot to mention, so the author is also a Black woman, and our main character is Ghanaian, which I believe the author is as well. So that adds the additional dimension of being a woman of color in STEM, and specifically a Black scientist, and what that means. So it's all these layers, and they're layered so beautifully and so complexly. I resonated a lot with this book, and I also learned a lot from this book. Yeah, if you want to read about grief and science and coming of age in your late 20s when everything is confusing, this is a gem, an absolute gem. I have another book about grief for you, and it's actually another graphic novel, and for some reason it's really heavy, so watch me struggle lift it. Also because I went rock climbing yesterday and everything hurts. Did you know there was a sequel to this? Did you know there was a second Hyperbole and a Half book? I didn't at first, and then I saw this chonk. And it's a chonk. It's both taller and thicker than my edition of Hyperbole and a Half. And it's amazing. So you might be wondering, isn't this comedy? Like, I said it was about grief. This is supposed to be comedy. Also, if you don't know what this is, but you think you might recognize it, it's the do all the things meme. I might put it up. So Ali Brosh originally started as a blogger and comic artist, and then she assembled those into a book called Hyperbole and a Half. It mostly documented her experiences with depression, but also her childhood. And in Solutions and Other Problems, the sequel, she mostly documents the grief of losing her sister as a grown-up. But it's also hilarious. So it's a book about grief, but it's also a book where a lot of it is written in like child logic, like toddler logic, or animal logic, or very drunk person logic, which I find beyond hilarious. Like, that is my exact brand of humor sometimes. So it's like, you will laugh, you will cry quite legitimately. It is a breeze and a joy to read through. Look at these gorgeous illustrations. That's why it's so heavy. It's like glossy paper. And there's so many pictures. and just, I want to reread it right now. Like, I want to pause this video and go back to reading this, even though I read it like not even a year ago, because it's so funny, but also so poignant. I love it. You'll love it. If you haven't read the first one, read the first one first, then get your hands on this. It's so good. It's so good. So what I'm excited about in this video is I'm recommending different kind of formats of books. This next one is a poetry memoir. It's called Shout. So this is by an author that you might recognize because it is also the author of Speak. So I actually reread Speak after reading Shout. They're companion books. So if you don't know about Speak, it's the story of a high school girl who develops selective mutism after being assaulted at a summer high school party. And the book is about her grief and coming to terms with the trauma. And it's a really beautiful book, and the movie is surprisingly good and surprisingly faithful to the book. And it was somewhat of a cultural phenomenon when it came out, I think over like 20 years ago now. It's like a YA classic. And if you haven't read it, this is my side recommendation. I'm not counting this in my like top 10 reads, but this is probably one of my favorite books of all time. It has its flaws, but it's so good and so important that it definitely falls into one, like, I'm never giving away this book. It lives in my house. It's not going anywhere. And Shout is staying here too. So Shout is written in response to Speak by the same author many years later. So she talks about her own experiences with sexual violence, and she talks a lot about readers going up to her and talking to her about their experiences. Readers of various genders and various ages talking to her about a variety of experiences, and is extremely moving. It's written all kind of in free verse, as you can see, so it's a very, very quick book to read. I just sort of opened one. Ooh. Let me read you this. It's Speak, Draft 1, Page 1 from my journal. So this is when she was first writing Speak. First marking period. I'm looking for the key to open the door to this story. An overheard motel, room conversation. If they would just turn down the television, I could hear the words clearly, maybe find the magic formula. No outline, not this time. Just a character on a page, the stage, spotlighted and alone with her fear. Heart open, unsheltered. Melinda, age 14, trapped in a year with no calendar pages, just day after day of 14, because the hands of the clock in biology class are frozen at 5 till 3. Melinda being the main character in Speak. So yeah, it has its little tagline of the true story of a survivor who refused to be silenced. It's amazing. I really recommend it. It's obviously very dark material and like very upsetting, but also very moving. So I would exercise caution, actually, with a lot of the books I've recommended so far. You know, check the content warnings. I would exercise caution before picking this up, but I highly, highly recommend it. I think it's an amazing collection of free verse poetry. All right, on a much cheerier subject, and I say that very sarcastically, because this is another dark book that actually when I wrote my Goodreads review of it, I wrote, this reminds me of Speak in tone. And it's Hold Still by Nina LaCour. I have fallen in love with Nina LaCour. Nina LaCour writes the kind of books that if I had them when I was 16, I feel like I would have been like fixed forever, or at least felt very, very understood. So Hold Still is a story about a girl whose best friend dies by suicide. So our narrator is struggling with grief over losing her best friend to suicide and is trying to get through the school year. So structurally, it really follows Speak in the sense that we are following an event that happened over the summer, and then the school year takes us through the narrative. And the other parallel that it has with Speak is there's a lot of these tree and growth motifs that are really cool. Nina LaCour tends to give her characters cool hobbies, and in Hold Still, our character actually gets into carpentry and builds herself a really, really neat treehouse. It's kind of a side plot. I don't consider that a spoiler. And through the creative building process, she actually processes some of the grief that she feels. And she and her best friend, who died by suicide, were really into photography, which is what the title of the book comes from, like hold still so I can take your picture. But the phrase reappears in other contexts. And what's probably the most harrowing part about this book is that our main character actually finds her dead friend's diary and reads through it, and also interacts with her dead friend's family, parents, and I want to say brother as well. It's so sad, but it's such a beautiful exploration of grief. I read this in one day. Like, I stayed up until 4 a.m. reading it because I literally could not put it down. And again, it's very like young adulty. It definitely has its flaws, but it has so much heart that it's like unquestionable 5 stars. And same as Speak, like, I am never letting this book go. Like, it lives with me in my house. If I move across the ocean, it is coming with me. I absolutely loved it. Yeah, again, lots of content warnings for this one. Obviously, the book largely talks about teenage suicide, as well as grief and friendship and figuring out how to honor the dead while still moving on with your own life. I love books so much. I love books so much. And it's a pretty thin book, and I just love the cover art. It's so pretty. Look at this. Like, the colors are just, these wouldn't be my colors of choice, but they just work somehow. And then it's like a little bit illustrated. Yeah, not a lot, I don't think, but yeah. I think this is one of the pages from the diary of the friend who died. So there's a couple of illustrated pages. This is just like Solutions and Other Problems. I want to reread this right now. Like, literally, I'm looking at it. I'm like, this is thin. I could reread this in the next like 2-3 hours, right? And part of me really wants to, but then I will be a sobbing mess. Sometimes you gotta cry. Why not? Okay, I have 3 more books to tell you about. I don't own these 3, so I can't hold them up as fun props, but I will put them up here as usual. So, some more sad girl books. The next one I recommend is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. This will follow some of the themes. I've already talked about it in this video. It's a book with an unreliable narrator and a young woman, like late 20s-ish, if I'm remembering correctly, who is largely alone and who is dealing with things that are chasing her from her past. So this young woman is completely fine. She has like a decent office job, goes into it every day, does her thing, eats her lunch, drinks a bottle of vodka every weekend, as one does, and just sort of lives her life, and like, she's good. She's totally fine. She's completely fine. She was in foster care. Now she's like being taken care of, checked in by social services now and again. Like, she's good. She's totally fine. She's totally fine. Saying anything else feels like a spoiler. So she doesn't have a lot of people in her life, and then she does meet somebody who kind of forces her to actually interact with another human on a non-superficial level, and that unlocks a cascade. So because it's from the point of view of Eleanor, she struggles a lot with shame and guilt from some events in her past that are very unclear, but we discover as we go through the book. It's very harrowing. Like, a lot of these books have been dark, and this book is dark, like surprisingly dark. I really didn't think I'd like it, because I thought it would just be kind of more Elegance of the Hedgehog almost, which was like, that was fine. But Eleanor Oliphant, I don't even know what it reminds me of. I'm like, how do I get you to read it without spoiling the book? Things are not what they seem. Things are much darker than they seem. And it's very sad. That's what the kind of books I like, so maybe that's the kind of book you would like. I don't know. Okay, 2 more. Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. I don't have the book in front of me, sorry. This is amazing. So this is the format of book where we follow about a dozen characters and each one kind of gets their own chapter, and you get to know their inner world, and as the book progresses, their plot lines and lives intersect, sometimes over decades, like someone you met earlier has a child and then you follow their child, that kind of thing. And it's about, I think all the characters are Black women in the UK, I want to say. Black women or gender minorities, yeah. So I believe there's a trans woman, I believe there's 2 non-binary characters as well, and it's really good. It just sort of explores, I feel like I always say that about books, it's really good. It's because it is. It explores race and gender in the UK, also in America, because I think they travel to America quite a lot, and yeah, race, gender, sexuality. The construction of the storytelling is really amazing. I listened to this book on audiobook, actually, and I think that made me like it more because I know that the written format of the novel is very unconventional. Like, there's a lot of line breaks, I think there's no dialogue markers, things like that still bother me. I'm not really used to reading that kind of experimental writing. So if you're like me and might be a little put off by that, I really recommend the audiobook. The narration was chef's kiss. Absolute chef's kiss. Yeah, really, really good. Really, really good. Okay, so I have one more book I want to tell you about, and it wraps up this series really well. This book is called Invisible Women, and it is a data-driven book about how sex and gender discrepancies exist in our data about how we understand the world. Historically, things like medical data or urban development data or literally everything has been collected in the default human, i.e. the white male. So this book talks about some of the consequences of not having complete or accurate data sets that reflect the population. The bulk of the book is really about the data gap around women, but it also touches on other data gaps for other populations, such as racialized populations. And it's so good. It's so good. It just really opens your eyes to how some decisions might be getting made that seem objective but are totally not. They're completely not, because it just really opens your eyes how sometimes being data-driven doesn't actually mean being equitable and doesn't actually mean being objective, because the data in itself is biased. And I think this is a really important thing to remember as we move in a society that's more and more reliant on automation and artificial intelligence and basically reliant on big data. All data is not created equal. Data is not always collected objectively, even if it seems to be. There will be biases when it comes to study designs, etc. And this book explores those kinds of biases. I listened to this on audiobook as well. I really like listening to nonfiction rather than reading it. And it's really good if you're at all interested in data gaps or feminism or, yeah, data gaps in feminism. And this is the book for you. Okay, so those were my top 10 books that I read in 2021. Thanks for listening to me talk about them. I hope you found something new that you like. It got me really excited, and now I want to reread a bunch of them, which is a problem because I have way too many books on my TBR. It is a whole situation that I will tell you about in another video. So yeah, I want to thank you for watching, and before I conclude this video, I just want to tell you I made this sweater. I haven't shown any of my knitting yet, but I think in next week's video I will be doing a little bit more of a vlog and will include some knitting. So stay tuned for that, and yeah, thanks again for watching. If you've read any of these books and liked them or hated them, I'm interested. Tell me. Tell me, am I doing the YouTube thing right? Do the thing in the comments. You know, write me a comment. Alright, I'm gonna stop talking now. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and happy reading. Okay, bye.